think I'm allowed to take this off while speaking. Good afternoon. My name is Brad Trees, and I'm a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy here at Ohio Wesleyan. My friend and colleague Barbara Anderek was originally asked to speak about Tom on behalf of the faculty in the department, but unfortunately Barbara is not able to be with us today. She knew Tom since 1985 when she joined the department as an assistant professor, and she very much wanted to be here to help us commemorate Tom's career. I will do my best to fill in for her in that role. It is appropriate, I suppose, for me to do so because of my unique experience of knowing Tom as both a professor and a colleague. Tom was my academic advisor when I arrived on the OWU campus in the fall of 1982 as a rather naive freshman from rural Ohio. And more than any other faculty member I encountered during my time as a student here, Tom had the most profound impact on the trajectory of my professional life. When I entered OWU, I was thinking I would teach high school chemistry. Somehow, Tom, a physicist, was made my academic advisor. I have a vague recollection of a conversation we had in which I shared my love of mathematics. And so later on, when it came time to register for classes for the fall, he suggested that instead of taking general chemistry, I take his course in calculus-based general physics. I said, why not? I didn't know what I was signing up for. Later, I came to realize that during that first year of my college life, I saw modeled before me the work of an exemplary academic physicist. I had never seen anyone teach material with such delight and devotion, nor had I ever been challenged academically to such a degree. Still, it took me some months to realize that my effort level, calibrated based on demands of a high school physics course, needed a major overhaul, and that Tom demanded nothing less than a full commitment to his course. As an example, I figured out that the problems he asked on our exams were taken from the end of chapter problems in the textbook. So I began to attempt every one of the end of chapter problems. There are 50 to 100 of them for each chapter. Notice I said attempt. I didn't solve them all, but that was the effort I was putting forth. But it was not until later that first year when Tom taught us about the elegant result known as Gauss's law that I knew for sure that my career path was to be a physicist at a teaching institution like Ohio Wesleyan. I could not know, of course, that the majority of my teaching career would be at Ohio Wesleyan, but I did know that Tom's example was what I wished to emulate. I'm going to share with you just a few brief memories of the courses I took with him over the next 2 years of my undergraduate studies. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know we have some other former students who are going to be speaking today. I remember taking a course in nuclear physics from Tom, and nuclear physics was his specialty. And it's always dangerous to take a course from a professor in their specialty. I did that with no previous knowledge of quantum physics, so I really should have said to me, what are you thinking? I remember the 2-semester sequence in electronics. Those were probably the most demanding courses I took from Tom. I worked so hard that I was seeing electric circuits in all the mundane objects that were around me. I even managed to blow up a transformer right in front of him. I thought maybe he needed some more excitement. I remember the course in electricity and magnetism, which is somewhat infamous in the undergraduate physics curriculum for its mathematical complexity. He assigned every problem in the first chapter of that book, which was focused on vector calculus because we needed that strong background. He also spent a lot of time posing what's called the leaky capacitor problem, which I still remember. And that's a situation where you take a capacitor which normally has what's called an insulating material between its plates, but you let that material have some conductivity. He spent a lot of time in class talking about that problem, but there was an underlying reason why he did that, which he explained. He had been given that same problem on his oral exam in graduate school, and the professors had raked him over the coals with it. And he remembered that. And he explained to us that his undergraduate training in physics had not quite prepared him for graduate school, and he was determined that we, his students, would not suffer the same fate. He was going to make sure that we were well prepared for graduate school or whatever we pursued after our time at OU. During my senior year, Tom was in Spain with Mary Alice, who was teaching English as a second language. So I didn't get to work with him that year. I was pleasantly surprised, however, when I received a handwritten letter from him around the time of commencement, in which he explained that he was sorry he had not been able to work with me during the last year, and he shared his absolute confidence in my ability to be successful in my upcoming graduate work. Well, that letter meant a great deal to me, not just because he took the time to write it, but it also showed me that Tom was, while he was always pushing his students to do their best, he also knew when to help us look back and appreciate the accomplishments that we had made. Fast forward 11 years, and I returned to OU as a faculty member in the department, August 1997. This, it turns out, was Tom's last year before retirement, after 40 years of teaching. It was an honor to work with Tom as a faculty member, even for just 1 year. Since that time, I have come to understand even better that while Tom was highly demanding of his students, he was no less demanding of himself. On the occasion of his retirement, Barbara wrote the following in his biography for the commencement program, quote, "Through his lectures, he conveyed a love of physics, a demand for rigor in problem solving, and an injunction to attain one's very best in all endeavors." Close quote. I find that last phrase most apropos. As Barbara noted to me, although Tom was very demanding, he was always ready to work with any student who was willing to put forth the effort. This high level of commitment served many students well over the years, as I can attest. He was particularly good at calming down a student who was freaking out from the intensity of the coursework. I would say the only place where his patience wore a bit thin was in grading papers. But for anybody who's done that for many years, that's very understandable. He was well known for his emphatic comments on your paper if you were on the wrong track on a problem. In fact, graduating departmental majors from the class of 2005, yes, Tom taught part-time for the department well after his retirement, in fact, up until 2011. And these graduating students made what they called a proclamation about Tom's grading and shared it with us all. It reads, quote, "Whereas Dr. L. Thomas Dillman has inspired us to greater achievement by informing us of our mistakes with a large red no that fills a page, we hereby proclaim the no edition to hereafter be known as the Dillman negation," close quote. They crafted similar proclamations for all the faculty in the department based on our own teaching styles. That's the one they wrote for Tom. I thought that was a very creative way for the students to signal that they got it. The comments Tom wrote were intended to help them learn the material better. It was always in their best interest. I will just add one extra interesting historical fact in doing the research here and discovering that the last class, I believe this is the last class he taught for us, was in 2011, analog electronics. 2011, so 10 years ago. So he would have been just around 79, 80 years old. To teach that demanding course at that age just boggles my mind. Tom's reputation for high quality and demanding teaching was perhaps greatest in the electronics classes. He seemed to take particular delight in those courses, and his effectiveness in teaching them allowed for the institution, via fundraising from former students, to dedicate in his honor a laboratory for the instruction of electronics in the then newly renovated Science Center, which is where we are today. The fundraising effort had been undertaken without Tom's knowledge. And in October 2004, we held a surprise dedication ceremony, it was a surprise to Tom, for the new lab. And it was named the L. Thomas Dillman Electronics Laboratory. Approximately 25 faculty colleagues, family members, and former students all traveled here and waited in the new classroom to surprise him and honor him at the dedication. And when he entered the room, he was surprised. In fact, my colleague Barbara was worried he might pass out. I think it's accurate to say that he was both flabbergasted and delighted. And that was a wonderful day. Tom's devotion to his vocation took multiple forms. For many years, he was at the cutting edge of technology when it came to pedagogy. He was one of the first people on campus to have an email address. And he was using computers in the general physics lab many years before it was common to do so in the profession. During his year in Europe, he wrote an entire text on modern physics. One particularly innovative aspect of the text were computational problems that could be solved on a programmable HP calculator. In scholarship, Tom was proud, and deservedly so, of his impressive work in collaboration with physicists at Oak Ridge National Laboratory on the decay schemes of radionuclides. This work became a key reference for the nuclear medicine and radiation protection communities, and I want to show it to you. Get a sense of the size of this tome. Okay? These are tables of radionuclide transformations, energy and intensity of emissions, and he is recognized in the foreword as being the main contributor to the content in this reference. And I will just show you, he shared it with us when we were students. He was particularly proud of the computer program he wrote that would then create these decay schemes, these diagrams. There are thousands of them in here, and he did that. In fact, I learned from our departmental lab manager, Cale Seacrest, that not that long ago, 2009, he was contacted by a former employee of Oak Ridge, and now a government contractor, who wanted the program that he had written because they still wanted to use it. It seems to me there was a guiding principle always underlying Tom's work, and that's this. If you believe in the merit of what you do, then you must give your full devotion to it. There is no such thing as too much work or being over-prepared. He applied this maxim to himself as well as to the students he taught. When I received tenure here, the Faculty Personnel Committee awarded me one of the endowed chairs in the department. Imagine my gratification when I learned it was the same chair Tom had held. The full title of the chair is the Richardson Linebaugh Professor of Engineering. I've always found that amusing because I'm a physicist, not an engineer. But then again, Tom was a physicist too. And so I consider myself to be in very good company. I'll close with this simple statement of gratitude. From one of your many students and colleagues, thank you, Tom, for blazing a brilliant path for us to follow.
Greetings. My name is Colleen Huckabee, and I was asked to say a few words today because Tom was my friend for over 40 years. The occasion of that is that in 1979, my husband Bill and I and the Gordons, Bob and Kay, wanted to start a Unitarian Universalist fellowship here. And there wasn't one, but we heard very soon that Tom and Mary Alice had attempted such a thing a few years earlier, and that they might be interested in joining us. Oh, thank goodness they were. Now, Unitarians don't have saints normally, but if they did, we would have St. Tom and St. Mary Alice for our group. Untold times. We've had meals with them, we've had concerts, we've had parties, we've had game nights, and we've had good company and kindness. In the course of this fellowship, it was a do-it-yourself deal. We didn't have a minister for many years, so I happen to remember one sermon that Tom gave that struck me, and he was pretty passionate about it too. It was about Universalists, and he had done considerable research, and it was in 1961 that the Universalists and the Unitarians merged. The Universalists were the more spiritual, rurally located part of that joint event, and make no mistake, if you're a Universalist, that means everyone is saved. Everyone counts. No one is left out. And that was an important part of Tom. And if you had to have a motto from that group, it would be, one you've heard before, God is love. There's a mantra, a Buddhist mantra that I like that kind of filters down to this. Our actions are our only true belongings. Some of Tom's belongings that I observed over the years were that he was a kind, gentle man, sometimes I thought even a little bit shy. He was unassuming and bright as can be, thoughtful. Now, I want to talk a bit about, if I can find where I am on my paper here. Yeah. In closing, I want to make some nod to we know about his dedication to our fellowship, more than that, to his family, his interests like music. I know he paid for music lessons. You don't get someone who can play the violin like Susan if you don't have training to do that. He loved his bicycling. Many of those things we'd shared and talked about over the years. But to give a nod to physics is a bit of a reach for me. It's not my corner of the world. However, I just finished a fascinating biography of Albert Einstein. So in a nod to quantum mechanics, I'm going to talk about Schrodinger's cat. Tom had a cat which he dearly loved, probably had several, but this last one, he really loved. Schrodinger's cat is a paradox, as you may well know, some of you a lot better than I do, in which it's a thought experiment. And so the cat is in this box, and it has all the things that it needs to be comfortable and safe, but you can't see or hear what's going on. There's also an ampule of radioactive material there. And so the situation is, if and when that ampule falls, and if and when the radiation at random is released, it could kill the cat. So the question is the cat alive? Yes. Is the cat dead? Yes. And only until you can verify something can you say anything more. the paradox. Here's our paradox. Has Tom died? Yes, he has, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're sad. Is Tom alive? Oh, yes. In our hearts, in our minds, in our memories, because he was so dear to us. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Wendell Patton. I taught zoology at Ohio Wesleyan when Tom was here teaching physics. He was a neighbor of mine, and as you will hear, this presentation is quite different. It's all about breakfast. Tom and I shared over 100 breakfasts around Delaware County over many, many years, and Tom was an important part of the process, and that's what I'm going to talk about, sort of a travelogue of Delaware County, too. We got to know the Dillmans when we moved to Lincoln Avenue in 1968, and our families became friends. Later, I joined Tom and Bob Calkins for years of interesting and sometimes adventurous Saturday morning trips to area restaurants that created many enduring memories. There was a discussion as to where we wanted to go, but never any particular urgency to get there. Just seeing what showed up along the way, watching Bob take photographs here and there, and then, of course, having breakfast. In the winter, we walked, often through snow and mud, trying to avoid Central Avenue at all costs. To get to the fried cornmeal mush, which we adored, at Bueller's, we climbed up over the railroad track at the end of Lincoln Avenue, down into the woods behind Dempsey Middle School, and out into an apartment parking lot. Coming back, we crossed Delaware Run on an small old bridge behind the hospital, negotiated the golf course, and went under the railroad on a narrow, slippery ledge on the side of the tunnel for Delaware Run. Bob Evans' restaurant involved car dealer parking lots and homes through the cemetery. The corner cafe on the east side required crossing a lot of tracks to get there and negotiating the unimproved railroad bridge over the Olentangy on the way back. Tom was a bit acrophobic, but he bravely persevered. In good weather, it was all cycling, mostly on country roads to places that changed over the years, but all had restaurants. Ridgewood, Prospect, Waldo, Sunbury, or Galena, Marysville, Powell, or a few times Plain City and Centerburg. Tom was a moderating and encouraging force throughout. Usually, we found a vaguely circular path to avoid retracing ourselves. For a long time, we rode standard bicycles and then graduated to heavy recumbents. Recumbent bicycles are easy on the bottom and allow upright views of the surroundings. But for me, they were awkward and hard to start. Tom would wait patiently to see when I was actually going to get the darn thing going again after a stop. I was often a bit of a laggard on any bike, and Tom regularly slowed to check that all was okay and exchange bits of scientific and other news. He was interested in everything, and we spent considerable time on clouds and why contrails were moving in different directions. Before the trees leafed out, we enjoyed watching activities at a heron rookery along the Scioto. When eagles moved in, the herons decided to leave, and interest shifted to finding an eaglet poking his head above the nest. Other reminiscences include the ospreys at Alum Creek, leisurely bird watching on the boardwalk in Hoover Reservoir, the day the chain broke on Tom's recumbent bike, and the bane of all road cyclists, the sudden appearance of that infamous "road closed ahead" sign. Unless it was obvious that we really had to detour, Tom was usually amenable to let's figure it out if we can find a way to get through. This led to some unforgettable experiences, maybe unforgivable too. Getting the bikes through blackberry thickets into and out of a deep ravine, hauling them over and through a muddy ditch full of overflowing waste from a chicken farm. Change your clothes when you're in the garage, please. And managing to lift our heavy recumbent bikes over a 4-foot barricade on an abandoned bridge. Later, when common sense, increased road traffic, and input from our wives prevailed, we drove to the Magnetic Springs Cafe, where we became expected regulars, each with our preferred breakfast. Tom's was a single poached egg, 1 piece of wheat toast, half a cinnamon roll, and a cup of green tea. There we would chat with the proprietor, Sylvia, and other regulars, and discuss interesting science that we had come across during the week. Tom was fond of his shop. Years ago, he made me a useful gadget for my camera. We were much impressed by the ingenuity shown in the complex equipment he made for use in a physics lab. In all, Tom's calm demeanor, consideration, helpfulness, and wide-ranging interests made him a valued friend and traveling companion. I miss him greatly.
Good evening, everyone. I was Dr. Tom Dillman's student in 1994. I attended physics classes in the same electronics labs that we heard about. So I grew up in a society far away where students are expected to hold teachers in the same esteemed regard as their parents. Dr. Dillman personified those teachers who actually earned that respect and established that special relationship with their students. I first met Dr. Dillman 31 years ago this month, possibly this very week. And he became my advisor, teacher, and mentor for the next 3 years. I came far away from home and family, and Dr. Dillman became the wind beneath my wings. He inspired his students to excel and perform to the best of their abilities. He played a critical role in my life for who I am today. We, the international students, came from the other side of the world, and Dr. Dillman became our hero. To most of us, he was one of the best teachers on the planet, great teacher, great man. During my 3 years at Ohio Wesleyan, when Dr. Dillman was teaching, I was always in his class. In fact, for a couple of semesters, I was the only student in some of his classes. His name comes up at dinner tables around the world as his students tell stories of their professor whose passion for science and physics was exemplary. Dr. Dillman not only taught the laws of physics, he was also an exceptional mentor. When it came to teaching, he left no stone unturned. And that is what he expected from his students too. This is exactly why Dr. Dillman is fondly remembered by his students around the world. He's remembered today by my extended family in America, who had the good fortune of meeting him and seeing him in person. My mom and my sister messaged me this morning to convey their condolences to Mary Alice. They fondly remember both of you from our Seattle get-together in summer of 2008. I did not know what to expect when I embarked on the journey to Ohio Wesleyan. But today I can tell you that I could not have asked or dreamed of more. Being a Dr. Dillman student is an honor that I can boast about all the way to life hereafter. My wife, Fatima, and I got to spend some special times with the Dillmans. We cherished our walks through Puget Sound University campus, our trip to the art museums at Stanford. Dr. Dillman was always in the mood for a conversation about scientific progress. He was fascinated about the possibility of driverless cars on the roads of Ohio. I'm indebted to Mrs. Dillman and my wife for making memories, for making our 2016 reunion memorable. My best memories are from Dr. Dillman's California visit, when a bunch of his students got together to cherish the days gone by and to thank Mr. and Mrs. Dillman in person. Fatma and I will cherish that evening forever. Dr. Dillman had a special place in my life, and he always will. There is no exaggeration whatsoever if I say that I truly regarded him as a father. It gave me great happiness when he readily agreed to attend my son's high school graduation ceremony. Mrs. Dillman, please accept our heartfelt gratitude to you and Dr. Dillman. You will always be in our hearts, and you will always be in our prayers and close to our hearts. We continue to look forward to your annual letters. Thank you, and God bless all.
"Fisher, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Those words, uttered by my physics professor, Dr. Dillman, and directed at me, a sophomore physics student, were strikingly uncharacteristic of this quiet and gentle man. But of course, he had good reason to be incredulous, as I had cleverly plugged a counting device into a radiation analyzer solely because it looked to me like the plugs matched and it seemed like it would be a natural thing for the two machines to work together. Of course, they didn't, and I probably did significant damage to at least one of the machines. I don't remember now. However, I do remember that in taking physics classes for the first time as a sophomore from Dr. Dillman, I decided I wanted to be a physics major. He had such a wonderful love of the beauty of physics and how it applied to everything in the world that it just made you want to understand more and more. And isn't that what a great teacher always does, whatever the subject matter? Tom was one of those great teachers. But perhaps even more importantly, after I'd graduated and become a high school physics teacher myself, my wife Diane and I came to know Tom and his wife Mary Alice as wonderful and delightful people, sharing interests in travel, music, and even biking. Whenever we passed through Delaware, we would try to schedule a visit with the Dillmans. At our most recent time together, just this past May, Tom was a bit more stooped over as he told me he was going to be 90 this year, but he was his lively and energetic self as we shared conversations for more than 2 hours about the world, science, music, and his family. As always, we left feeling fortunate to have been able to be connected in a small way to this wonderful couple. At a time like this, it's natural to be sad about losing Tom. But that's our own self-interested view. Really, aren't we thankful that we were among those who had the opportunity to be raised or mentored or taught or befriended by this remarkable person who has contributed so much to our world? Mary Alice, I know it's terribly hard to have lost your best friend, but I also know that the two of you have had so many wonderful times and experiences together, and that will support you and enable you to continue with that caring for the world attitude that the two of you shared with each other and with so many of us over the years. We still look forward to future visits. Thanks for the opportunity to let me speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Kwak Mi Ling. At a higher version, they call me Guo Mei Ling, my Mandarin pronunciation. I am a former physics student of Professor Tom Dillman. I came from the Malaysian state of Sarawak on Borneo Island in September of 1972, and I graduated in May of 1975. I am honored to have to be here today to share some of my experiences involving Professor Dillman while I was at Ohio Wesleyan. So at that time, there were quite a few foreign students in the physics department. By the way, I like to use the word foreign instead of international, because we were truly foreign in terms of language, customs, beliefs, upbringing, and all the totally different, set of rules that we had to follow. So we're truly foreign students. And foreign students of Asian origin like me, we were in awe and were a little bit scared of Professor Dillman in the beginning, you know. But this is totally due to our Asian upbringing of respecting, even fearing authority figures like a professor. So as the quarters went by, we grew to love his classes, and we realized that he was actually a very warm and approachable person. And Professor Dillman was a very gifted and dedicated physics teacher. And he always had time and patience to answer all our questions. And his office door was always open for us. And he armed us with a very strong foundation in physics and to prepare us for graduate studies. And this is all borne out by the many advanced degree holders among his former students. And Professor Tree's comments on the nuclear physics class resonated with me. Anyway, so as time went by, we got to know Professor Dillman and his family better and better. And we got invited to Dillman's home for dinner quite often, especially during holiday seasons, since we foreign students had nowhere to go and we felt homesick. The Dillmans welcomed us with open arms and made us feel really at home. I remember one occasion, after dinner, we adjourned to the living room and listened to the beautiful violin music provided by young Susan. And then another occasion, after dinner, we cleared the dining table and we played Scrabble together. And of course, Professor Dillman was really, really good. We could not beat him. No way. And during the spring quarter of 1975, I gained graduate admission to study in the electrical engineering department at Washington University in St. Louis. And I was supposed to report to summer classes sometime in May of 1975. And I had no clue how to move myself from Delaware to St. Louis. I didn't even know how far St. Louis was and where it was. And I had little money. I didn't have a car. I didn't even have a driver's license. So I was very sick, and I lost a lot of sleep over it, and I must have looked really depressed and dejected. But one day, Professor Dillman saw me in the hallway, and then he asked me, "Come to my office." So we went to his office. He closed the door. He sat down, looked at me straight in my eyes. "What's wrong?" I just didn't know what to say. I was just timid and sheepishly just kept quiet, you know. And then he said, "You can tell me." So after some more hesitation, I finally got up enough courage to tell him that I've been very sick because I didn't know how to move myself from Delaware to St. Louis to attend graduate school. Immediately he said, "I'll drive you there." I was just shocked that this professor of mine, high on the pedestal, would come down to the ground and drive me to St. Louis. I was just, you know. And then he saw me kind of that I was frozen, And he said, don't worry, just focus on your finals and senior project. And then I still stood there dumbfounded, and finally I mumbled a thank you, and then left his office. And it took me a few days to let all this sink in. And then I was able to calm down and started working on my prepare for finals and my senior project. Then one early morning in early May 1975, Professor Dillman and young Brad came to my apartment, and we loaded up my belongings and headed off to St. Louis. I believe it was a station wagon. And I believe Brad came along to keep his dad company on the long journey back to Delaware. Liz is just like a dad driving a son to college. And this has been etched in my mind forever. I have 3 grown children, and when I took them to their dormitories, I reminded them of my trip with Tom and Brad. And they were amazed that I was so lucky to have such a professor. So Professor Dillman, thank you for all you have done for me, and thank you for providing us with a tremendous example of a life well lived, and for being an American father to a boy from the jungles of Borneo here in America. Thank you very much, Professor Dillman. May you rest in peace in your heavenly abode. Thank you.
As I was thinking about my father and what I would say today, I wrote up a list of some of the characteristics and traits that he had that I observed over many years. So I thought I would talk about some of those traits and characteristics. I'm sure you who knew him probably saw many of these characteristics, and I certainly, over the years, have tried to emulate some of these traits in him. Many of the good ones, and unfortunately a few of the bad too, like being a workaholic. But one of the things that my father was a perfectionist, and that can be good and bad, and yet one of the things I learned from him was that when you do something, you try to do it right the first time, and you try to do it well. And that was manifested in many things that he did, especially that I observed at home. When he took on a task, he would prepare very carefully, and he wouldn't finish it until it was done right. And that meant working a long time on a project, whether it's building a railroad track for me or something as time-consuming as removing all of the old paint from the entire house with a little electric gun. I think it took him 3 or 4 summers. But darn it, he was going to do it. And he was going to get down to the bare wood, and he was going to sand it, and he was going to make sure that that new layer of paint stuck for a long time. So that's the kind of perfectionism that I saw him display. And but that perfectionism, I think, also was shown through in his teaching and in his own work. For example, he and his son-in-law co-wrote a word processing program and spent hours and hours and nights over several years completing that. And he was also I guess what you could call a do-it-yourselfer before there were really do-it-yourselfers. I think that probably was because he grew up on a farm and was very familiar with fixing things and using tools. He loved to use tools and taught me how to use them. And he also, one of the first things I remember just being amazed at was that he literally built our first TV, color TV, in our basement. He ordered something that was called a Heath kit, and I don't know where it came from, but it was all of the transistors and tubes and things, and I don't know how long he spent, but he built our TV and he soldered it together, and I thought that was pretty amazing. But that's the kind of do-it-yourselfer he was. He wanted to prove that he could do it, and that TV lasted a long time. It really did. He also always had a sense of curiosity, and again, he was always interested in how things worked and always wanted to explain to me how things worked, and certainly to students. But I saw that curiosity particularly when we went on long bike rides, many long bike rides, where he was as interested in animals as he was in plants, to the way bikes worked, and to history and towns that we visited. So I always appreciated that sense of curiosity. As I said, he and I rode bikes many years. I probably rode bikes with him more than anybody else. Starting, as I remember it, in 1975. I was 10 years old, and that was the first year we rode long bike rides together. And so in the spring of '75, we did the Mid-Ohio Century, which was a 100-mile ride here in Delaware County. Then 2 weeks later, we did our first Tosserve, tour of the Scioto River Valley. That was a 200-mile ride over 2 days from Columbus to Portsmouth and back. And then for some crazy reason in July of that year, we decided to go even bigger. And we did the Midwest Double Century out of Wapakoneta, Ohio. And that was a ride 200 miles in 24 hours. And I was 10 years old. But we did it. And we were pretty hooked on long bike rides that year. We went on to do all three of those major rides, I think over the next 4 years, at least I did them. And in addition to that, before I graduated from high school, we rode up to Sandusky, Ohio, and then took a long camping, biking trip to Canada, North Carolina. And so, again, he loved bike riding, he loved to observe the world around him, and of course, I think he loved to spend time with me. And we had many memorable trips together. He also had a love of nature, and I saw that on our bike rides. And as most of you know, he loved cats a lot, and particularly Twiggy in his older years. But before that, there were lots of other cats, like Elmo and Felix. And he, again, I think his love of animals maybe was related to having grown up on a farm. And he often told the story of his, when he was a young child, one of his beloved cats. He said he really loved this cat, and one day, I don't know how old he was, he was playing with this shotgun on the farm, and he was shooting at rabbits. Anyways, he took aim at a rabbit and pulled the trigger and discovered that he'd actually shot his poor cat. And he said he just felt terrible about that for quite a long time. And I thought that, again, is an example of his love for animals from a very early age. Another characteristic of my dad was that he led a very healthy lifestyle, I guess you could say, from quite an early age. I remember in the 70s, he used to prepare this, I'll call it a concoction, for breakfast. And I still don't remember everything that went into it. But it was some kind of granola. He put powders on it, and then he would top it off with lots of soy lecithin. And then some milk or something. But he ate that concoction faithfully for many, many years, and I think it gave him a couple of extra years of life later on. But he did try to live a healthy lifestyle. He ate well. He had a weakness, though, for ice cream, as many of you probably know. He would eat lots of it whenever he could. So it did counteract some of his other healthy lifestyle characteristics. He also, I think you could say, he lived a life of moderation. He was never prone to excess. I don't remember him as someone who would complain about the world around him. He didn't complain about his own life. He never complained about money. And he wasn't vain. He was a frugal person. And he cared a lot about other people. I can't remember him ever putting down another person. That wasn't his style. He loved to laugh. He had a good sense of humor, as many of you probably know. He loved a good debate, and particularly about politics as he got older and older. And I do remember his sense of humor, particularly well, I'll mention a couple of stories that he told where his sense of humor came through. He once, when he was younger, he and his brother Louis, he told us, were driving a car in rural Indiana, a real old car. They were coming to the end of a country road, and it was a T, and they had to turn. Well, the brakes went out on the car, he said, and they ended up crashing. The car rolled, and he said they landed upside down in the car. And he said, we stayed in the car for quite a while, not knowing how we were going to get out. We felt they were trapped. And he said, eventually we realized you just have to roll down the window. And that's what they did, and they were fine, but they were hanging upside down for quite a long time before they figured that out. Anyways, he loved to tell that story. And he had also a sense of humor that I was exposed to through his love of mathematics. So when I was in high school one time, I don't know, we were talking about math homework or something. And he wrote out for me a very long mathematical proof using formulas. And it started with a sphere and the formula for the surface area of a sphere. Anyways, he wrote out this long proof, and the proof was that pi actually equals 4. And he went through it and he showed me it, and sure enough, pi does equal 4 if you don't know. And anyways, he was basically trying to show me he was trying to challenge me if I could figure out what the flaw in the proof was. But he took great delight in showing that to me, and of course I proved that pi was 4 to all my friends the next day in high school. So I had fun with it too. Another characteristic of my dad that I admired was I think he was always someone who adapted to change in our world, change in our society. I was always amazed to learn that I think he voted for Adlai Stevenson and Barry Goldwater in the 50s and 60s, and then 1972, he's got a George McGovern sign in the yard. What? So, he changed his politics, and I think he, to his credit, was open to understanding the world could change around him and that he would have to change with it. He had strong principles about many things, but I think he could express and live those principles in an undogmatic way, and I always appreciated that. He also had a good, strong sense of right and wrong. I think most importantly, again, he cared for other people. He cared very much for the students that he taught at Ohio Wesleyan, and he often talked about them for years and years after they left. He always enjoyed his colleagues at Ohio Wesleyan, and he loved the university as well and was loyal to it for almost 50 years. It was clearly a place that meant a lot to him. In this building where he spent much of his time. He cared dearly for his close friends, and of course, he cared for his family, and he was a workaholic, but he always made time for his family. And I was the youngest child, so fortunately I got a lot of his time as I was growing up. But he did care a lot to make time in his life for his family. That was for games, for camping, for outdoor activities. So all of us in the Dillman family were fortunate to have such a father. And I'm sure for you, you saw many qualities in him, and I think it's fitting to consider the influence that he had on all of us and to celebrate the fact that he had a good life. And I'm so glad that was the case.
It is a rare thing today for a grandchild to really come to know a grandparent. It's not simply the physical distance that so often separates grandchildren and their grandparents, but also the emotional distance that arises naturally from the young and old growing up in different cultural moments that foster diverging traditions and distinct worldviews. Collectively, these forces tend to produce a certain unintentional incuriousness, whereby grandchildren might develop at least passive awareness of the general chronology of their grandparents' lives, but seldom gain deep insight into how these experiences shaped their grandparents' minds and thus laid the foundations of their values and habits. His commitment to overcoming these forces and providing his grandchildren with every opportunity to learn his life history and philosophy is what made my grandpa Dillman so exceptional. I'm sure each of his 4 grandchildren had a slightly different experience of this devotion, but 3 manifestations were almost certainly shared by all, namely our grandfather's dedication of time, his openness of thought, and his perceptive kindness. Whether it was working with me late into the night to solve a particularly difficult math problem, or helping me build an electromagnet for a science fair project, or taking me for a long bike ride through the quiet Ohio countryside, he gave freely of his time so that I might learn to relish problem-solving opportunities and persevere through their challenges, learn to embrace the uncertainty inherent in any pursuit that demands tinkering or involves the quest for new knowledge, and perhaps above all, learn to engage the natural world and marvel at its beauty. Yet he was never dogmatic in his approach to teaching, always encouraging me to think independently, especially in matters of faith. In all our conversations, he made it clear that he wished to understand me and my ideas, listening attentively even when he disagreed. And it was that same attentiveness in conversation that also made him so kind. Just as he knew when the time was right to dispute your thinking and provide some gentle redirection, he also knew when all you needed was some loving reassurance. And it was in those latter moments he would reach across the table, pat your arm affectionately, and affirm that he had heard you and that his belief in you was unwavering. As much as it saddens me to think of that buoying sliver of belief as now gone from the world, I feel so fortunate to have had a grandfather who cared enough to make himself truly known to me. So Grandpa, wherever you are, thank you, and I love you.
So this was Dad's father's violin, and I guess he enjoyed playing some fiddling on the farm in Indiana. And so I had it restored. It even has, and Dad practically cried when I showed it to him because it has teeth and tongue. It has a lion's head. And I had it restored, and he was just over the moon. As you know, what we've talked about, his kindness and his enthusiasm. He just said, "Oh, Susan, you know, can't you hear? Oh, that is just wonderful, you know." And he just went on, and then of course when I played it, he was just, you know, rapt with attention and wanted to know all about what, you know, they had to do to restore it. But it led to, I ended up marrying a banjo player. And so, then, you know, started going to workshops, and there were other fiddlers who had lion's heads, and we would all, you know, like hiss at each other and like show our squirrel. But, I'm so glad that Dave and I can play a little bit of some of the music that we played for him and in the living room, and that he was so appreciative of, and that Mom was so appreciative of, and the whole family was so supportive, and that we can play some of that music. And this particular song is dear to our hearts too. It was written by a banjo player named Richie Stearns, and so this is "I Am With You Always." Sorry, got a little. Nickname is Gramps, and Gramps is really sensitive to temperature changes, so it's really air conditioned in here. So, because the date in here says 1719. I don't know, but he's old. Yes.
I am with you always, though you cannot see. I hold your hand from the other side, circle is complete. You will go where I've gone, I'll wait patiently. I am with you always, we will always be. The sun and the rain and the wind will always be the same. The way that I feel all about you will never change. The sun will rise, the rain will fall, and the winds will blow. Though your image might fade around the edges, our love will always grow. I am with you always, though you cannot see. Hold your hand from the other side, the circle is complete. You will go where I've gone, I'll wait patiently. I am with you always, we will always be. The sun and the rain and the wind will always be the same. The way that I feel all about you will never change. The sun will rise, the rain will fall, and the winds will blow. Though your image might fade around the edges, our love will always grow. I am with you always, though you cannot see. Hold your hand from the other side, the circle is complete. You will go where I've gone, I'll wait patiently. I am with you always, we will always be.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and relax, talk amongst yourselves. We'll just play a few more tunes, but just as background, and thank you, everybody. Oh, I'm sorry, Brian.
I don't have anything prepared, but I just want to say something about the Dillman and what they have done to change my life. 47 years ago, while I was in Malaysia, I got accepted to Howard Wesleyan University, and I got a letter from Dr. Dillman and Mom Dillman that they would like to be my host family. Okay, I was completely flabbergasted somebody would do that for me. So when I came, they picked me up at about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning from the airport. Of course, for me, 12 o'clock at that time was, let's say midnight is 12 o'clock in the afternoon, Malaysia time. They have been very wonderful to me, and they have really influenced my life. One thing I realized in my old age, I'm retired. That's why I call myself old, is that in Malaysia, when I went to secondary school, if you know how to add 1 plus 1, and you know how to do multiplication, you are in the science stream. So that makes you into the sciences. It was the third world, right? In my old age, I realized that that's really not my thing. I'm really in a field called intellectual history, which is really a marriage of many things. But it's better for me to discover that now, late than never. So I did engineering with my physics and mathematics from Ohio Wesleyan University. Have been very good to me. And I can tell that during those years when I was building computer chips, I was looking out the window. I always say, is there something I can do out there? But anyway, it's just saying that when you have an education early in your life, look inside you and see what you're really into. But unfortunately, for many of us in the third world, that is just not an option. So I got hooked into that. But I want to say that knowing the Dillmans have been a big part of my life, okay? And before that, for me over there was the connector that connected me to them. And the rest of my life is history. Of course, when I first came, Brad was a little kid, 47 years ago. How old were you at that time? 1975. 10, okay. Of course, Susan was still a high school kid, so I know all of you when you were young. Actually, when you were sitting over there, I didn't know that was you. And when you were standing up here, I just realized that you were a young copy of your dad. And you are very kind too. Like you said, you pick up those characteristics from your dad and your mom. Okay? And I want to say that you have been a blessing to my life. And I'd like to thank you all very much. And to Dr. Dillman. May he rest in peace.
So I first met Tom Dillman in the spring of 1994 when I interviewed, and he was part of the faculty personnel committee triad that explained to me how things worked at Ohio Wesleyan. And it was Ann Fry, who is here today, and Tom Dillman and Jeff Nunemacher. And that was probably the deciding factor that led to my accepting the job at Ohio Wesleyan, meeting the three of them, three of the faculty at Ohio Wesleyan that I've most admired and tried to kind of model myself on, because they had the reputation for both pushing their students fairly hard, but also nurturing their students' interest. The story I want to tell you today, though, is that since I taught organic chemistry, which was required for pre-med and pre-vets, and Tom taught the physics class, also required for pre-med and pre-vets, we often shared students. So I'm not sure what the shared students were telling him about me, but I particularly remember a story. Jimmy Johnson, who was a student that we shared, who is now a large animal vet, and at the time was working at the Columbus Zoo. Actually, he had an appearance on David Letterman. His job was wrangling the snow leopard cubs to make sure that they didn't do anything bad while David Letterman was interviewing Jack Hanna. But Jimmy came in, and he was kind of crestfallen after getting a lab wrong in the physics lab. He had done something, and he had tried to explain it away in his lab report in that way that students typically do, by just saying, well, there must have been some human error. Tom, of course, was having none of that. Tom wanted to know what had actually gone wrong. And after significant discussion with Jimmy and finding out exactly what Jimmy had done, which didn't quite match what the lab manual said, he said, Jimmy, that wasn't an error, that was a blunder. So,
Well, before we go, our family would really like to thank all of you for being here, because it's meant a lot to us. And we really appreciate your kindness and comfort, your presence here brings to all of us. And finally, we invite you to enjoy some punch and refreshments if you'd like.